It is our early trade deadline prediction show here, Brad. Now, the trade deadline is still a little bit over a month away, but
Right.
all of the strategies and the calls and checking in on certain players, who's available, who's not, all of that is happening and has been happening. One of our favorite websites, The Athletic, in addition to Bleacher Report, has a lot of content from one Jim Bowden. Now, I know some people just, he puts out a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah.
None of it is really like, this is exactly what's going to happen. A lot of it is like, this is what I'm hearing. But we're going to use all of that information. We have our own thoughts. We have our own thoughts on the Giants farm system. We have our own thoughts on who the Giants actually need. And we are going to go over 4 players, 2 from you and 2 from me, who we think are actual targets. Now, I'm going to admit, one of mine is a reach. And the reason why it's a reach is more or less to kind of like make a point about the Giants in general and what they are missing. And I'll get to that as we get there. But why don't you go ahead and lead off? You have 2 pitchers that you're going to talk about. I have 2 everyday players.
Yeah.
And why don't you give your first one? Who is the first person on your list that should be a trade target for the Giants?
Well, and the reason I went with 2 starting pitchers mainly is because the Giants starting pitching, as we know, is in a bit of a bind.
You know, they should just trade for like 11 short relievers, and then that's just they're just going to run through
that works
openers all season long.
Yeah, who can pitch 3 innings today? Raise your hand. I think that might be our starting rotation. We have 2 starters. If you want to count Hayden Birdsong, who got called up and will start tonight for the Giants against the Cubs, then we have 3 starters.
Yes.
Webb, Hicks, healthy starters. Harrison IL, Wynn IL, Snell IL, Robbie Ray working his way back from Tommy John IL, and also Alex Cobb. Up in the air, we have no idea. So that's why I went with 2 starting pitchers. And the 2 starting pitchers I went with, one of them is talked about a little bit on the trade market. The other one is talked about quite a bit on the trade market. And both of these guys are pitchers that I enjoy watching this season. I have to admit they're both on my fantasy team, but that's neither here nor there.
You're paying extra attention to them this year.
Yeah, exactly. So one of them is Jack Flaherty, 28-year-old right-handed starter. He is in Detroit this season. He was with the Cardinals for a few seasons, traded to the Baltimore Orioles last year, where the second half of the season, he really had a rough time, +6 ERA after he got traded to Baltimore. But the asking price, I'm hoping, is not going to be astronomical with him compared to other starting pitchers because he is only controllable this season. He's an unrestricted free agent next year. Like I said, 28 years old. He's making $14 million this year. If the Giants can swing, hey, you know what? They have the room. Maybe they can eat some of that contract and not have to give up as many prospects. He's in a career year for his strikeouts per 9 right now at 11.7. So he is a big strikeout guy. The Giants could use a strikeout starting pitcher because the defense, the Giants kind of tried to build up their middle defense this season, up the middle. Nick Ahmed at shortstop, Jung-Hoo Lee in center field. Well, that hasn't panned out. Ahmed got hurt, missed some time. We had to have Brett Wisely at shortstop. We've talked about extensively. Doesn't look like the most stable shortstop when he's playing that position. And Jung-Hoo Lee, of course, out for the season. So if you can get a guy on the mound who can induce strikeouts and not have to put so much pressure on the defense. Jack Flaherty is one of those guys. He eats innings too. He averages 6 innings per start right now. His career best ERA of 2.92 this season. His FIP is 2.70. So he's right around the same for his FIP and his ERA, which kind of bodes well. Again, it's because he's a strikeout pitcher. He doesn't have to worry about putting the ball in play. So that's my number 1 starting pitcher target.
I like it. And he is, like you said, he is out there. He is widely rumored in a lot of the pieces that we've been reading. And the reason why I think this makes sense is because he's an unrestricted free agent after this season. So the team that is trading him cannot expect to receive a ton in return because you're essentially paying for him to pitch for you for, for 80 games or half of a season. And thus what you have to give up is not going to be that big of a deal. I've seen some other and when you look at some of the offers, you're like, oh, like the rumored thing, it's not that big of a deal. Now, who do the Giants give up on the other side to pick him up? And if you look at who their prospects are, you probably can kind of go a little deeper into the prospect list than you would for some of these other players that we're going to talk about, who in some instances would actually break the bank in the farm system. So that I like that one. And I like what you said about just his consistency this year. And if the Giants are lacking one thing, it is the consistency behind Logan Webb, which not that we thought Blake Snell was going to be the most consistent guy, but we thought the combination of Blake Snell and Alex Cobb as your 2-3 is actually a pretty good 3-person staff right there. And then you add in the young guys like Jordan Hicks and Kyle Harrison. You go, okay, then there's not much pressure on those guys to do a ton. So it hasn't worked out that way. And if you actually do bring in someone like Flaherty, you do stabilize that. And then, and here's something that we've kind of been talking about, and I have no idea how this actually works in reality. Jordan Hicks already hit his highest innings ever. He mentioned that he was tired in his last start.
Right.
Kyle Harrison has not pitched a ton of innings in his short big league career. And so you don't know what those guys are going to do once you get to the second half of the season. How often are they going to pitch? Do you have to give them 2 weeks off here, 2 weeks off there? And so then there's questions there with those two young pitchers. There are questions with Blake Snell, who just said in the media that he feels like he is being pressured to return, and he doesn't feel ready to return. He still feels a little worried about his injury, so there's a giant question mark there. Alex Cobb has been a giant question mark just because of his age and his body breaking down in ways that are unrelated to the original reason why he was on the shelf. And then Robbie Ray. So that's 5 question marks, all based on either wear and tear or injury. And so you need someone like Flaherty to stabilize what you have because of that aspect of there's just so much risk in what you believe in about the second half of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, and any kind of trade for a starting pitcher also is really, really going to take the pressure off of the bullpen. Right now, the Giants are, going into tonight's game, they're a third of an innings pitched less than having the lead for the most amount of innings pitched for a bullpen this season. So they're right up there. That basically put them as number one, as having the most bullpen innings pitched. The left on base percentage, 21st% in the league. And again, you can get bullpen help also. There are bullpen pieces out there. Do you need to concentrate more on the bullpen? Like you said, do you go out and get 11 tweener starter bullpen guys and roll that way? Or do you look at the starting pitching and try to find some guys who could eat innings, rest your bullpen, and have your bullpen become an actual bullpen? The Giants bullpen ERA this year is 21st at 4.35, but then you look at FIP, they're right around the middle, 3.81. So they're pretty average. I mean, it's an average FIP for a bullpen. Not the best and not the worst, but I think you clean all of that up, the more starters you get.
Yeah, and I think that is what you just said right there to 10. That is probably how the organization looks at it, which is our bullpen is taxed. If we can figure out the rotation a little better, then you don't have the tired arms in the bullpen having to pitch high leverage innings. And I think, but again, that goes back to what we were just saying with so many question marks. You have to fix the starting rotation to even be able to diagnose what the problems are in the bullpen.
Right. And there's arms in the bullpen. In the minors, you've got Hayden Birdsong who could help you out. You've got Reggie Crawford who can help you out. I mean, a lot of guys who can help
Mason
you
Black
out.
just came back up as well, right?
Yeah, and Mason Black. And again, these Birdsong and Black, they're starters. But again, if you go out and trade for a Jack Flaherty, then you can afford to have those guys be your 3-inning guys in the middle. So when you get Blake Snell, who's going 4 innings, 4 2/3, 5 1/3, and you need somebody to come in before Sean Jelly's arm falls off, they kind of need to find more avenues to help eat those innings, to get to the back end, to get to Taylor Rogers, who's having a fantastic season, and get to Doval, and then hopefully have Walker and Randy Rodriguez on the back end throwing darts, and but just that bridge right now and having to use the opener so much, it's painful. Hey, it last night. That's fine.
Sure.
It worked last night, but it does not work every night. And your bullpen is very tired.
I just wanted to mention my favorite nickname in the chat right now is Darren Lewis Slays. Shout out to D-Lou.
D-Lou, wow. Look
at but there was a question by DIQ_smooth. He says, what do you mean a normal bullpen workload? Like they are overusing some guys and underusing others. And it's what we just talked about. When you have to use a bullpen to basically take care of an entire game like they did last night, you're hoping the next night that maybe your starter can get you, or maybe you're even forcing your starter to get through a large amount of the next game so that you don't have to use the bullpen. But when you go back to back bullpen games, you are taxing the relievers to an extent of where you're just asking for injuries, man. You're asking for injuries. You're asking for pitching with tired arms. And I think if you could actually have a dependable, like we're not even asking for 5 guys who can go 6 innings. We're asking for 3 guys who can go 6 innings, right?
Yeah.
And then you're relying on the bullpen less. And someone like Eric Miller, who we saw come in the beginning of the season, and this dude's throwing 98, 99, and you're like, wow, this guy could be something. But then when he has to pitch so often, including opening up games in the last 2 weeks, you could tell, you're like, okay, like they're probably taxing him a bit more than he's used to. And it's like a trickle down throughout the rest of the rotation. Yeah, okay. Sure. I'm going to go with somebody who my son, JJ, asked us, what about Jazz Chisholm? And I was like, Jazz, like, have you seen his numbers? They're like so bad. And he won the poll in The Athletic for most overrated player in Major League Baseball, which we believe some of that is getting the cover of MLB The Show last year. A little bit of hate from that.
Yeah.
But as you see his numbers tick up, and as you see the flexibility that he gives you on a team that, who would you rather have playing middle infield? Would you rather have Brett Wisely or Jazz Chisholm? I mean, I think it's a good question. Brett Wisely's playing really good baseball right now. Or what about having both guys in the lineup at the same time? Sure. And this is one thing that you and I have talked about constantly, which is the Giants have no team speed. And when you have no team speed, you're just going base to base, and you're relying on guys in the order to have productive outs. And if they don't, then you're kind of screwed. And if you bring someone like Jazz Chisholm, who can hit for power and hit for speed, then you're kind of leaning into what baseball is today. Like we're behind the trend in where baseball is going. We had this conversation on our regular Thompson and Clark podcast earlier this week, which was, if the trend says speed matters, the Giants brass is like, we don't believe in that for the last at least the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And so now I think it's time to open their eyes to it. And if you bring him in now, Jazz Chisholm is not going to come in cheap. I'm going to read off what the trade offer, and this is going to possibly give some fans a heart attack here, but this comes from The Athletic. It comes from Jim Bowden, and he says the Giants would have to give up Carson Wisenhunt, who's the number 2 prospect on from the MLB for the Giants on the MLB list of Giants prospect. He's number 2, and Marco Luciano, who is number 1, and Luis Matos, who is not on the prospect list anymore, but is still a very young player who the Giants have been bringing up and down for the last couple of seasons. That is a lot to give up for Jazz. Now, why is Jazz that valuable, or why does he, why would be able to ask for that much money? It is all in the control that you have over his salary. Jazz Chisholm, based on arbitration, make $2,625,000 this year for his production, and a part of this is his future production or his expected production. That's one of the lower salaried guys probably in the league for his production or his expected production. So he's got 2 more ARB years left, and then he's an unrestricted free agency in 2027. So we just mentioned that he was on the list of the most overrated players in baseball. And so I wanted to just go over quickly, some of his stats, because again, you're paying for what you hope he is or what you hope he becomes. This year, he's got 10 jacks. He's got 14 stolen bases. That immediately changes the trajectory of the Giants lineup. Do they have a guy? Off the top of my head, I can't remember if they have a guy who has 10 jacks yet. Has Soler got there yet? I'm not exactly sure. And 14 stolen bases would put him in the lead on the team by far. Like, no one even comes close to 14 stolen bases on the current team. And the question is, will he get on base consistently? Because that has been his issue in his short major league careers. He just doesn't really get on base. Now, he's got the pop and he's got the speed. So maybe you can be okay with a lower on base percentage because he does have a little bit of pop. But his best on base percentage of his entire career so far is this year, and that's at 332. Right. So, there is something there in worrying about giving up so much for him. I don't know if Farhan 100% does it, because it's not Farhan baseball. But again, you and I have been talking about, we need to go with where baseball is going, and power and speed, at least offensively, is where things are. When you have no power and no speed, you have to rely on, okay, can the team get on base? Can the team advance their runners? They're not doing any of those things. So adding Jazz, I think, would fix a couple of the problems that they have offensively.
It would also add excitement to the lineup. It would add excitement to the, fans purchasing tickets, because Jazz, I mean, he's a great ball player, and he's an even more exciting human being. He's fun to watch. The thing is, if you're making this move, move for the future, because you're mortgaging so much of the future, but you're also getting Jazz in a Giants uniform through the 2026 season. What do you do next season when Jung-Hoo Lee is back? Where does Jazz go? Does he go to a corner outfield spot? Does he go to Arrows at second base? He's going to be there for a few more years. Is he now your shortstop? What happens to Luciano? We've talked about Luciano is a DH. I don't think he's not a position player. He doesn't have a position. That's the whole problem. And they've got Jorge Soler locked up for another couple of seasons. So you're going to have to move Soler, or Luciano is going to have to wait longer. Or is Luciano part of the Jazz trade? I mean, that's also a possibility as well. I personally would not like to see that. I'd like to see Jazz in a Giants uniform. At what price, though? That's the hard thing. But having a guy like Jazz in the Giants lineup really lengthens your lineup, gives you speed at the top. I don't know if you feel this. I feel this sometimes when watching Giants baseball lately. It's not, it's station to station baseball, but it's like, it feels more like the Muni in San Francisco, where instead of 3 bases, you add a couple stops in between. I feel like there's like 5 bases out there because of how slowly we get from station to station. So to have a guy like Jazz, and then next season, and I hate to even look into next season because we're talking about the trade deadline, we're talking about 2024, but looking at next season, you add Jung-Hoo Lee back in there, and now your lineup gets even longer and more exciting at the top. So to mortgage a little bit of the future, I'm okay with that. If you're going to be giving away, 3-4 top prospects to the Marlins for that, again, is it going to be a Farhan saving his job measure? I mean, we have to look at that too.
And that's a great point. Old School in the chat says Farhan will be buying in order to save his job. If he sells, he's gone. And I like that in of itself is the lens that we need to look at Farhan through, because they tested the free agent market. Now, some of these guys fell onto their laps because they didn't get the offers that they wanted, and these contracts that we hate with the player options. But I think that's how you have to look at it. If the Marlins said, okay, you don't want to give us both Whisenhunt, by the way, the Whiz kid, like, we got to do something. We got to turn that Whiz part of his name positive instead of juvenile, right? The Whiz kid.
Well, we got to see what he does first.
All right, so
the bigs before he gets a
nickname.
If
the Marlins said we definitely want one of your top 2 prospects, either Luciano or Whisenhunt. Who do you and then this is if you like Jazz, which we both like Jazz. Is Jazz is, may not be a game changer. I think offensively there are some things in that giant park that he could do very well. But out of those 2, who would you be willing to trade if Jazz was on your list?
That's a tough one because I know what the Giants think of starting pitching. So that's a hard one. They don't part with much starting pitching, especially in the position they're in now. And I like Whisenhunt and I like Luciano's prospects, but again, at this point, unless he gets better defensively somewhere to crack the lineup, and granted, that's the reason he's not up in the majors right now. It's not because he can't hit. It's because there is nowhere to put him on the field, and we already have a DH, so a right-handed DH. So that being said, that's the reason he's not up here. I would be fine, I think, parting with Luciano and maybe another prospect for Jazz. Again, we're looking at a couple of years of control of Jazz before he's a free agent. So you get him the rest of this season, you get all next season, all the season after that. And he could be a building block. And then he could be good for free agency too. I know somebody in the comments said, if he's the most overrated player, you don't get any free agents. I don't think it works like that, but I think you're going to get free agents because they're going to see, hey, we can hit in that lineup. And I mean, lefty.
What the commenter, I understand the sentiment, and they think, I'm sure some of the overratedness, probably some people may think, oh, he's feeling himself a little bit. All of those things, like we said, the cover of the show, maybe there's a little jealousy there. I don't know. Jazz, I've heard some Jazz comments about, what he thinks about his team and certain things. And he is very much, I think he's probably frustrated, as anybody who plays for the Marlins would be, at their inconsistency, right? They're competitive one year and then they sell off all the competitive pieces in the next year. And that's just the way that they are. They're kind of like the Oakland A's in that way. So, all right. Now, I think what we also need to realize is when people are available for trade, like, no perfect players are available for trade. You are available for a trade for a reason. Unless you're Mason Miller, then you're like, okay, like, there's no reason the A's should possibly trade him except that they're the A's. But you're not getting a Jazz Chisholm who is the perfect player, because if he was the perfect player, he would not be on the trade block to be dealt from a bad team. So, all right, who is your next one?
All right, so my next player that I would love to trade for, and again, this one's a little bit of a stretch, a little bit of a reach. He may not even be available this season, but Seth Lugo, right-handed pitcher. He's 34 years old, pitching for the Royals right now. Again, having another starting pitcher with a career year. A lot of control left, but at 34 years old, making $15 million a year. He has a player option. So he's making $15 million this year, $15 million next year, and he has a player option for $15 million in 2026. So maybe not on the hook for a ton, but he may opt in to that depending on how the next couple of seasons go. He does also give you over 6 innings per start. ERA of 2.29. His FIP is 3.36, so it's a little bit higher than his ERA. So that's kind of telling that, it's possible he's got a good defense working behind him. Not a huge strikeout pitcher, but he does throw hard and he does get the outs. And again, looking at the FIP, the 3.36, that means that the ball does get put into play. So the Giants defense has to kind of do a little work for him. But again, the Royals, they are kind of rebuilding, but they're playing well this season. So is it a matter of the Royals would like to continue that rebuild and get even better and trade Lugo at the deadline and get some prospects back and continue to build and then dip into free agency again next season? If that's the case, the Giants could get a nice, older 34-year-old right-handed starter with some experience. And I think that would go a long way. And I mean, just building on everything we've talked about, needing starting pitching, if the Giants can go out and get both of those guys, it'd be fantastic. I don't think they're going to. But, I didn't put Garrett Crochet on the list. I didn't put some of the other obvious choices on the list because Crochet's going to, his asking price is going to be ridiculous. And we talked about that with the White Sox. They're going to be asking for a ton. Farhan's not going to be into that. I don't even know if the Dodgers can pull that one off because I don't even know if they have enough in the top end prospect list to give to the White Sox at this point when they can kind of spread that around to other teams. But
yes. And the thing about someone like Lugo is you have to understand the mentality of the Kansas City Royals. Who I think, people are pretty happy with how they're playing so far.
sure.
But I think there's always this worry that they're going to fall off, right? Like, oh, is this for real? They are currently 43 and 38. And so, right in the mix for a wild card.
But they've been bad lately.
But they are 3-7 in their last 10 games. So,
right.
You think about it as, oh, this is kind of happening again. Are they going to, to be there in the mix? They are currently right outside of the wild card, a half a game behind the Red Sox. And that is a competitive wild card. The American League wild card is ridiculous. You have the Baltimore Orioles at 49 and 30 as the top wild card team. And the only reason is because the Yankees are ridiculously 52 and 29. So that is going to be competitive. Now, if you're the Royals, do you look at this season and go, hey, we did really good, but if somebody's willing to give us something for a guy, that is, we don't know if he's going to duplicate this next year, they may be interested in trading him, and they may be looking at it as, this is not our year. It's going to be, let's take advantage of this. I don't think they expected Seth Lugo to have the season that he's having right now. So well, I like the thought behind the trade for sure.
Yeah, and I don't think the Royals thought that they were going to be competing this early in their rebuild. I think they were targeting more next year or the year after. So if that's the case, Lugo has a player option in 2026 when the Royals were supposed to be competing. So, are there going to be growing pains the rest of the season for the Royals? Are there going to be some more growing pains next year until all of their prospects come up and they make the trades and free agency moves that they need to make to shore up the team and be a competitor? I mean, remember, they're in the American League Central, so it's not, they don't have to compete too hard, every season. That seems to kind of be one of the weaker American League divisions. But if that's the case, then Lugo at 34 years old, that's the guy you trade. So he may be available, and that's why I threw him in there. He was more, like I said, he was more of my stretch. So Jack Flaherty, Seth Lugo, those are two guys. Put those guys in black and orange, and we could be clicking, man.
Oh, you think yours is a stretch? Get ready, man.
Yes.
Here,
I like it.
I'm going to give a little bit of the thought behind what I'm saying. So this player, it may not just be about this player, but it's about the strategy and the focus for how the Giants should be looking at players, in my opinion. We're just hardcore fans who really study this stuff. Now, I don't want to overstep my bounds here, Farhan. The player who I'm looking at is Bo Bichette. I don't think Bo Bichette is going to be traded to the Giants. Let me say that right now. But I do think he is the type of player that they should take a shot at least looking into what it would take. Now, we just talked about the trade for Jazz. I would imagine the hefty price would be very similar for Bo. Because he's got, he's got this. They've got the same sort of control, and he's under contract for the next 3 years, and they avoided arb years, I think, by extending him. So he's not a free agent until 2026. So you'd have him for a few years. But here's the thing behind what trading for him is about. What it really is about finding young players who are in positions of need, and you're going to have to overpay for those guys. You think of your center fielder, the Giants, at least we hope in our hearts, they've locked up that position for the next several years with Jung-Hoo Lee.
Right.
Now you look up the middle. I think the hope was that Luciano was going to be that guy, and you and I have watched this dude play shortstop. It's not great.
No.
Can some of that be fixed? Maybe. He's too big. He's not slick enough. He's probably going to be better as a corner infielder or a corner outfielder in his career, or he's just essentially a DH, and you have Soler right now for the next couple of years. What it also does is it takes away opportunity from the Dodgers. Now, if anybody was to say, who is Bo Bichette going to get traded to if he gets traded? I think most people would say it's the Dodgers. There's a need for the Dodgers there. They don't have a shortstop because Gavin Lux is throwing like Steve Sachs from shortstop to first base. So Mookie Betts has had to take over and play shortstop. Now, is Mookie Betts the best shortstop? No, Mookie Betts is not the best shortstop. He and Brett Wisely are probably similar in the way that they attack baseballs. But because he is such a valuable piece, he's like, look, I can do it. I'm not going to be the best, but I'll be dependable, and then we'll plug in positions somewhere else. The Dodgers trading for Bo Bichette would just allow them to move Mookie back to wherever they want him to be. And you mentioned, would they be able to trade for Crochet? Will they be able to trade for Bichette, which is actually a need for them right now with Mookie on the shelf for who knows how long? So the Giants would be adding a young player who plays a very important position, who has had success in the past, and for this reason is just having a bad season. They would also have to give up more than likely 2 of their top 5 prospects or something like that in order to get him. And maybe they would even have to ship out a player who actually makes a little bit of money to kind of offset his contract in that space as well. But the idea behind Bichette, I think, is the more important thing, rather than actually, are they going to get Bichette or not? Like, I would say, let's go get him, because they have a void at shortstop that they have not filled. I know, Big Nick Ahmed hit a gigantic home run for them the other day, but that, those are few and far between for him. He's really there just to play shortstop defensively. So I think you fill an important spot. You are looking, this is a trade. You look ahead for the future. You fill a need for this year. And you get younger, you get more athletic, you add more power, And I get it. There's going to be people who go like, Bo's having a crappy year this year. Yeah, that happens. Baseball's
Sure.
hard. You look at a lot of really good baseball players, and there's like on and off years in just about every non-Barry Bonds baseball card. So that I want that mentality to be there, though. We've built up this farm system. Have they made a decision on Luciano yet? I think they've made a decision on Matos as far as maybe what his ceiling is, but it would be probably that trade probably starts with Wisenhunt, and you would have to be willing to give him up to make that deal. So, but I like the mentality of that deal.
I think if you go for either Jazz or Bo Bichette, you're doing something to kind of fill a void also. And it's good for Giants fans. I think this is good because we have not been able to get and land the big free agents on the 8-year, 10-year contracts that we've wanted in Judge and Harper and Yamamoto and Shohei. Correa. Should I keep going? I mean, there's a long list. But that being said, this kind of fills that void a little bit. If you can't get the big free agents to come, you trade for guys with control, but you do have to give up for that, because the alternative is you keep building your farm system and keep hoping some of these guys hit. At the same time, you're signing players to 1-year deals with 1-year opt-outs, or you take those prospects that you're building in the minor league system and you use them as trade chips to go out and get those guys that you have for a few years that have played in the majors, that you've seen what they can do, and you know that they can turn it around and become who they were. I mean, Jazz is having a better season this year than he did last year, and he was hurt last year. He only had one career year over an OPS plus of 100, and that was 2 years ago. So it's not like we're talking Jazz has completely fallen off. I mean, he had an OPS plus of 138 in 2022, and this year he has an OPS plus of 112, and he's still stealing bases, and he's still only 26 years old. So yeah, you got to look at these guys and say they're young. They still have a lot left in them. But what do the prospects have in them? We don't know. They're all question marks. Not until you get Elliot Ramos was a question mark until this season. I still feel like he's a question mark. His batting average is coming back down to earth, but still, when you have prospects, until you get them up there and see them in 100+ games, 200+ games, you don't know exactly who you have. And like you said, what is their ceiling? You've got to find that.
Yes, 100%. And you made another great comment, which is if you cannot bring these guys over for whatever reason in free agency, you have to trade for them and hope that your organization is strong enough to where those guys want to stick around. Like, go back to the Giants trading for Hunter Pence. Hunter Pence was a young player at that time, and would he have signed with the Giants? Who knows? They were coming off of, at least one World Series. But at that point, you sell him on the organization. Now look at Hunter Pence right now. This dude is like, he's doing radio. He's doing TV. I liked his time in San Francisco, right? So that is what the opportunity is there. Okay, I want to go through a couple of players just who are on the list of rumored guys, and we'll just kind of quickly go through them. But before that, I asked the chat if they would rather see the Giants add an arm or a position player at the deadline, and position player won 57% to 43%. Okay, let's look at this list that I've curated here. Let me see. Am I looking at the right one? Okay. So let's go through some pitchers. We already mentioned Crochet. We already mentioned Flaherty. What about Luis Severino from the Mets?
Again, starting pitching, give it to me. I don't at this point. You need somebody who's alive and breathing on the mound that could get you 5 innings. So, yes.
Another pitcher who, if you have the money and you are willing to pay the money, is available for $11 million this year and $18 next year, and that is Zach Eflin from the Rays.
I haven't seen much of his work this season. I don't know what his numbers are. I'm gonna pass on him.
All right, from
when there are so many others out there, I hate to pass on starting pitching, but
all right, from another player from the Marlins, and maybe you just do a giant deal and get both of these guys, Jesus Luzardo.
Yeah, so Luzardo, I almost put him in my top 2. He's a guy who's having a rough season, 5 ERA, 4.25 FIP, but he gets you 5 innings a start, which is the only requirement I have for a trade at this point. 2022 and 23 had a sub 4 ERA. And then 2022 and 23, he also had Ks per 9 over 10. This year, he's only at 7.8, so something has fallen off. Again, ERA of 5.
You kind of start wondering about arm injuries at that point.
You do, and he's 26 years old. He's a lefty. He has had arm problems in the past. He had 178 innings in 2023, and then 66 and 2/3 this season in 2024. For the Giants, that would be 4th on the list of starters for innings pitched. Again, that's top 5. We'll take it. Anything to strengthen that bullpen and give them time off. I would take a Luzardo trade. I mean, if you're talking about Luzardo and Jazz in a trade, and the Giants have to give up quite a few prospects, those are future pieces. I mean, those are guys that are, could last you quite a while. What's Luzardo? Let's see. He's free agent in 2027. So you'd have both of those guys through the 26 season.
Yeah.
So I'd be fine with the trade. Yeah.
All right, let's go to the outfield. Somebody who I loved just the idea of the Giants being interested in. He struggled in the beginning of this season pretty poorly, but he's since fared a little bit better, and that is Randy Arozarena from the Rays.
I like him. I like his style. I like his power potential. I like that he gets on base, but yeah, he's having a rough season, man. And I had some stuff on him too about his contract. Yeah, see, he's a Boris guy. So
yes,
that's a bit concerning only because he's a free agent after 2026. But that's more likely to make the Rays trade him. But again, do they trade him this season when he's having a bad first half? Or do you wait to see what he does and explodes in the second half? Then you trade him in the offseason because you still have him next year and 2026. So I think they probably play the waiting game on Arozarena, and I don't think he gets traded this season. I'd like him. I would like to have him on the cheap, but I don't think
the other thing about Arozarena is right now he's at 8. Right. And he's got 2 ARB years left. And so that 8 is probably going to turn into, 10, 11, 12 at some point. So it's, at 8, he looks great. And then you go, but is he great at like 14? That's something to think about.
In a couple of years, maybe, because that might be around his price at that time, or, the medium.
All right. Last one, Luis Robert Jr., who, when we first started looking at players, he was the one that just like exploded on the list as far as guys who were gettable. And it's only because the White Sox are so bad. But over the last couple of weeks, I started to see him fall off of these lists. And it sounds like the reason is that the White Sox asking price just got a little insane for some of these teams. So now some of this might entirely be poker, right? You see this happen where it's just like, nope, we don't believe that, he's worth this much, so we're pulling off. And then it's up to the other team. Do they really want to trade him? Is it that big of a deal? So there's a lot of poker being played right now. And you look at at him and you think like, gosh, what a no-brainer how is this guy available, especially at the money that he's actually making. So in 2024, he's at 12 and a half. 2025, it bumps up to 15. 2026, 2027, he's at 20, and he's a free agent in 2028. So you will theoretically have him, if you traded for him, the rest of this season, and then 4 more seasons under contract. So that is, I mean, that looks great if you're the team trading for him, but now it's at what cost? Because if we just talked about, do the Giants want to give up, 2 out of their top 5 prospects for a Chisholm or a Bichette? I can only imagine what it would take to get someone like that because of his past production and the other thing, this is something that we Giants fans have to consider, and probably other teams don't consider it that much. He's a right-handed hitter hitting at Oracle, which would make those numbers probably go down a little bit. But let's end with Louis Bob.
Yeah, and he's a guy who has a hard time staying healthy. Also, he's a one season where he almost hit 40 home runs. Other than that, he's been under 20 because of injuries and COVID season. But his potential is really, really nice. That contract's not terrible.
It's actually pretty good if he plays.
It's good if he plays, and it's good if he plays up to his season last year where he had an OPS plus of 129. But again, that's staying healthy. He's a big dude, and you know how it goes with big dudes in the outfield. They have a tendency to run into things and not come out of it okay. But yeah, you'd have to give up a lot, and I don't think the Giants are willing to do a trade like that. I mean, and it's unfortunate for the Rays and it's unfortunate for the White Sox, but they're 2 top, outfield trade targets that they can get rid of and get a big haul back for, just both having horrible first halves of the season. But there are a lot of contending teams that need outfield help. So it's going to be a weird market. I just don't think the Giants are going to give up what the White Sox want for him.
And the other thing I forgot to mention about Arozarena, the other thing you like about him on this specific Giants team is just he adds a speed and a power element that they don't currently have. So, okay, the last poll was if we believed that the Giants would actually trade a top 5 prospect, because if they actually do trade a top 5 prospect, then that means they are going for it a little bit. They have not done that in a little while. So the consensus from the chat was 64% said yes. So I think that 64% understands the pressure that the organization is under to, be competitive, and the no, which was 36%. I think that is, we don't believe in Farhan until he does it.
yeah, pretty much. I think that's kind of the case. I mean, there's going to be, it's going to be a 50-50 split. If the Giants do trade top prospects for Jazz Chisholm, half the Giants fan base is going to hate this trade and half is going to like it. It's going to be one of those, you got to prove it things. But if the Giants really believe, even being 4 games under 500 right now, come the trade deadline, if they are still 4 games under 500 or 500, they believe that this move is going to get them into the playoffs this season. So that's going to be the key.
All right, that is it from here. For Brad, I am Double G. We will see you when we see you. Peace out.
Peace.